The Vareshi Historical Council had sent Delwyn to document savages. That was the expectation, at least. Humans came from a Category 4 Deathworld, a planet where the gravity crushed bones, the weather killed without warning, and the predators hunted everything that moved. Species from such worlds were typically brutal, simple creatures driven by survival instinct and little else. Delwyn had documented 47 species at war. This assignment should have been routine. The historian's shuttle docked with the human carrier vessel Resolute on the third day of the solar month. The ship was functional rather than elegant, built for purpose rather than beauty. Delwyn noted this in the first journal entry. Practical species. Dangerous species. The assessment seemed obvious. What happened next was not obvious at all. A human officer met Delwyn at the airlock. She was smaller than expected, barely reaching Delwyn's shoulder. Her name was Commander Nadia Petrova, and she smiled when she extended her hand in greeting. Delwyn had seen many expressions on the faces of warriors. Aggression, suspicion, cold assessment. But this human smiled as if meeting an old friend. Her grip was firm but not threatening. Her eyes held warmth. "Welcome aboard, historian," she said. "We're honored to have you with us." Honored. The word seemed wrong. Delwyn was here to observe and record, not to participate. The Vareshi were neutral in the conflict between the Galactic Alliance and the Kathrani Dominion. Yet Commander Petrova spoke as if Delwyn's presence mattered to her personally. The tour of the ship revealed more confusion. Human soldiers filled the corridors, preparing for deployment to a contested world called Mirren 6. They should have been focused, grim, silent. Instead, they talked and laughed. Some played games with small cards. Others listened to strange rhythmic sounds that Delwyn later learned was called music. One group was singing together, their voices rising and falling in harmony. The song seemed to be about a female human who had departed and might never return. It was melancholy and beautiful. Delwyn stopped walking. They are about to enter combat. Why do they sing sad songs? Commander Petrova paused beside the historian. Because the song reminds them of home, of people they love. It gives them something to fight for. Fighting for memories seems inefficient. The commander's smile did not fade, but something changed behind her eyes. You might be surprised, historian. Memories can be the strongest weapons of all. The briefing room held 30 officers and senior enlisted soldiers. Delwyn sat in the back, recording everything. Commander Petrova explained the mission. Kathrani forces had captured a mining colony on Mirren 6. 4,000 colonists were being held as labor slaves. Alliance forces had failed to breach the Kathrani defenses 3 times already. Human Battalion 12 would attempt what others had failed to achieve. The soldiers listened without complaint. Some took notes. Others simply nodded. When the briefing ended, they filed out in an orderly fashion. No questions about their chances of survival. No demands for better support or equipment. Just quiet acceptance. Delwyn approached Commander Petrova afterward. "Your soldiers do not seem concerned about the danger." "Oh, they're concerned," she replied. "But concern doesn't change the mission. Those colonists need help. We're the ones who can provide it. The Kathrani defenses are formidable. Your casualties will be significant." "Yes, and yet you proceed." Commander Petrova looked at Delwyn for a long moment. The warmth in her eyes remained, but now it was mixed with something harder. Something that Delwyn could not identify. "Historian, let me ask you something. If you saw a child drowning, would you jump in to save them?" "That would depend on my swimming ability and the risk involved." "For humans, the answer is always yes. We jump, even if we might drown ourselves. That's who we are." The dropships launched at dawn. Delwyn sat strapped into a seat among the soldiers, watching them prepare. They checked their weapons, adjusted their armor, and spoke quietly to one another. Some touched small photographs or held tiny objects in their hands. That a young soldier beside Delwyn noticed the historian's observation. His name was Private Okonkwo, and he held a worn piece of cloth with faded colors. "My mother's scarf," he explained without being asked. "She died when I was 12. I carry it everywhere. Does it provide tactical advantage?" Private Okonkwo laughed. It was a genuine sound, full of life. "No, historian. It reminds me why I'm here. I fight so that other children don't lose their mothers the way I lost mine. Delwyn recorded this statement, but did not understand it. The Kathrani on Mirren. 6 had no connection to Private Okonkwo's mother. The colonists being held were strangers to him. Yet he was willing to die for them because of a memory. The dropship shuddered as it entered the planet's atmosphere. Through the small viewport, Delwyn could see the surface approaching. Dust storms swirled across brown terrain. Somewhere down there, the enemy waited. Commander Petrova's voice came through the communication system. Remember why we're here. 4,000 people are counting on us. Let's bring them home. The soldiers responded with a single word, spoken in unison. Together. Then the doors opened, and the humans went to war. Delwyn followed, recorder activated, expecting to document primitive violence from a primitive species. The first journal entry concluded with words that would prove prophetic. I expected savages. I found something far more disturbing. They smiled at me. They sang songs about love. They carry memories of the dead into battle. I do not understand these creatures, but I'm beginning to suspect that understanding them may be the most important thing I ever do. The ground shook with weapons fire. Smoke filled the air, and somewhere ahead, the humans were laughing. Delwyn had never been more confused or more afraid. Plasma fire cut through the dusty air of Mirren, 6 like burning rain. Delwyn pressed against the wall of a ruined building, watching through a cracked window as human soldiers advanced across open ground toward the Kathrani positions. 3 humans fell in the first 30 seconds. Delwyn expected the advance to stop. Any rational species would retreat, regroup, and find a safer approach. The Vareshi certainly would. Even the aggressive Tellurin knew when to pull back. The humans did not stop. They did something that Delwyn had never witnessed in 4 decades of documenting warfare. The soldiers nearest to the fallen immediately changed direction. Instead of continuing toward the objective, they ran toward their wounded comrades. They grabbed them by their armor and dragged them toward cover while other soldiers provided protective fire. One of the rescuers took a plasma bolt to the shoulder. The impact spun him around, and Delwyn could see the burn mark through the scope of the recording device. The wound was severe. The human should have collapsed. He did not collapse. He switched his weapon to his other hand and kept firing while dragging his wounded friend with his injured arm. Delwyn's hands trembled while recording. This was not rational behavior. This was not survival instinct. This was something else entirely. Sergeant Luis Madeira appeared beside the historian. He was an older human with gray in his hair and scars on his face. His eyes constantly moved, scanning for threats. You should stay down, historian. The Kathrani have snipers. Your soldiers are exposing themselves to save the wounded. They are increasing their own casualties. Madeira looked at Delwyn with an expression that might have been pity. We don't leave our people behind. Ever. Not the wounded. Not even the dead. That is tactically inefficient. Maybe. But it's who we are. A burst of weapons fire drew their attention back to the battle. Commander Petrova's voice crackled through the communication devices. A squad was pinned down near the enemy fortifications. They could not advance or retreat. The Kathrani were closing in. Delwyn watched what happened next through the recording device, not quite believing it. Commander Petrova gathered a small group of soldiers and moved along a shallow ditch toward the enemy flank. They were exposed, vulnerable, and outnumbered. Any sensible commander would have sacrificed the pinned squad and preserved their forces for a better opportunity. Petrova did not sacrifice anyone. Her group attacked the Kathrani flank with explosive violence. The enemy position erupted in fire and smoke. The Kathrani, suddenly attacked from an unexpected direction, turned to face the new threat. This gave the pinned squad the chance to move. The battle shifted. The humans pushed forward. The Kathrani fell back. By sunset, the mining complex was under human control. 4,000 colonists were freed from the labor camps. They emerged blinking into the fading light, thin and weak but alive. Delwyn watched a human medic treating a colonist child. The medic's hands were gentle despite the chaos around them. The child was crying, and the medic spoke soft words that Delwyn could not hear. How many did you lose? Delwyn asked Commander Petrova when she finally stopped moving. 7 dead. 12 wounded, 3 critical. The Kathrani lost over 200. I don't count enemy dead, historian. I count my own. She walked away to check on her wounded soldiers. Delwyn followed at a distance, recording everything. The medical station was chaos and calm at the same time. Wounded humans lay on makeshift beds, while medics worked with quiet efficiency. What struck Delwyn most was the talking. The wounded soldiers were not screaming or complaining. They were asking about their friends. Did Okonkwo make it? Where's Santos? She was right behind me. Someone check on the new kid. He took a bad hit. Private Rita Okonkwo was among the wounded. The young soldier who had shown Delwyn his mother's scarf was now lying on a medical bed with burns across her chest. A medic worked desperately to stabilize her. Nearby, 3 soldiers sat waiting. They were not wounded, but they refused to leave. Delwyn learned that they were Okonkwo's squad mates. They had held their position under heavy fire for 40 minutes while the medic worked to save her. You lost 2 soldiers protecting her. Delwyn observed point one of them, a corporal with blood on his face, looked up. She's one of us. We don't leave each other. She may die anyway. Your sacrifice may be meaningless. The corporal's eyes hardened. Then she'll die knowing she wasn't alone. That's not meaningless, historian. That's everything. Later that night, Delwyn walked through the human camp. The soldiers were not celebrating their victory. They were sitting together in small groups, talking quietly. Some were crying. Others were laughing at shared memories. The contrast was impossible to understand. They had won. They had saved thousands of lives. Yet they mourned. Commander Petrova was sitting alone by a small fire. Delwyn approached and asked the question that had been building all day. You lost 7 soldiers. Your mission was successful. Why are you sad? She looked up. Her eyes were red, and her voice was tired. Because I knew those 7 soldiers. I knew their names, their families, their dreams. Every one of them was irreplaceable. But you saved 4,000 colonists. Yes, and I would trade any victory for 7 more minutes with the people I lost. She paused. That's the price of being human, historian. We feel everything, the joy and the grief. We can't turn it off. Delwyn sat down beside her, recorder forgotten. Then how do you continue? How do you face another battle, knowing you will lose more? Commander Petrova smiled. It was the saddest smile Delwyn had ever seen. Because the alternative is letting others suffer when we could help. We'd rather carry the grief than live with the guilt. She looked at the stars. Besides, we don't fight alone. We carry our dead with us. They give us strength. Delwyn's second journal entry was shorter than the first. When a Kathrani soldier fell today, its companions ignored the body and continued fighting. When a human fell, 3 others risked death to retrieve them. Even the dead. They went back for the dead. I am beginning to understand why the galaxy fears these creatures. It is not their weapons. It is their love. 6 weeks into the campaign, Delwyn had filled 17 journals with observations. Each entry raised more questions than it answered. The humans remained a puzzle that refused to be solved. The historian sat in the mess hall of the Resolute, watching soldiers eat their midday meal. They shared food from their plates without being asked. They made jokes that Delwyn did not understand. They touched each other constantly, hands on shoulders, arms around backs, fingers brushing fingers. Sergeant Madeira sat down across from Delwyn with a tray of food. He pushed a small portion toward the historian. You should eat something. You've been watching us like we're specimens in a laboratory. You are specimens. I am here to study and document. Madeira laugid. Fair enough. What have you learned so far? Delwyn considered the question carefully. Humans are contradictory. You are capable of extreme violence, yet you show mercy to enemies. You accept death as part of war, yet you grieve deeply for every loss. You fight with discipline and precision, yet you make decisions based on emotion. That's a pretty good summary, actually. Madeira took a bite of his food. We're complicated. We contain multitudes, as one of our old poets said. Why do you volunteer for this war? The conflict between the Alliance and the Kathrani does not affect your homeworld. You have no stake in the outcome. Madeira set down his utensil. His expression became serious. Historian, let me tell you a story. When I was young, There was a disaster in a region far from my home. Thousands of people were trapped without food or water. People from my country who had never met the victims and would never meet them sent help. Money, supplies, volunteers. We crossed oceans to help strangers. That seems wasteful. Maybe. But those strangers were suffering, and we could help. That was enough reason. He picked up his utensil again. With the same way with this war. The colonists being killed and enslaved by the Kathrani are strangers to us. But they're suffering, and we can help. So we do. Later that day, Delwyn witnessed something that challenged every assumption about warfare, that a patrol had captured a wounded Kathrani officer during a skirmish. The officer was brought back to the medical station, where Delwyn expected interrogation or execution. Both were standard practice in the dozens of conflicts the historian had documented. Instead, human medics treated the officer's wounds. The Kathrani was confused at first. It tried to resist, thinking the treatment was a trick. When the humans continued working gently and carefully, confusion turned to fear. Fear of the unknown, perhaps, or fear that this kindness was the prelude to something worse. Delwyn watched from a safe distance, recording everything that a human corporal named Maria Santos was assigned to guard the prisoner. She sat by the bed, weapon ready but not aimed at the wounded enemy. When the Kathrani woke, it stared at her with wide eyes. Why? The word came out harsh, damaged by the injury to the officer's throat. Santos looked at the prisoner calmly. Why what? Why help me? I am enemy. I killed your soldiers. You needed medical attention. We provide it. You should hate me. Santos shujijit. Maybe. But hate doesn't heal wounds. Besides, you're not my enemy right now. Right now, you're just a wounded being who needs help. The Kathrani stared at her for a long time. Delwyn saw something change in its eyes. Not understanding exactly, but something close to it. Your species is strange, the officer finally said. You have no idea, Santos replied with a small smile. When Alliance Command ordered the prisoner transferred to an intelligence facility, the Kathrani spoke one last time to its captors. I will remember this. What you did. The mercy you showed. Commander Petrova nodded. Remember it when the war is over. Remember that peace is possible. Delwyn recorded this exchange with trembling hands. In 40 years of documenting warfare, the historian had never seen an enemy treated with such dignity. It violated every principle of conflict that Delwyn understood. That night, Delwyn sought out Sergeant Madeira again. I do not understand your species. You show mercy to enemies who would kill you without hesitation. How is this a survival strategy? Madeira was cleaning his weapon, hands moving with practiced ease. It's not about survival, historian. It's about who we want to be. Explain. Every time we treat an enemy with cruelty, we become a little more like them. Every time we show mercy, we remind ourselves why we're fighting in the first place. He looked up. We're not fighting to destroy the Kathrani. We're fighting to protect the innocent. If we lose our humanity in the process, what's the point? But the Kathrani do not show mercy. They torture prisoners. They execute the wounded. Yes, and that's exactly why we don't do those things. Because we're different. Because we want to be different. Delwyn's journal entry that night was the longest yet. I have documented 47 species at war. The Kathrani fight for dominance. They conquer and destroy because strength is the only value they recognize. The Tellurian fight for resources, measuring victory in material gained. The Vashti fight for honor, seeking glory that will be remembered by their descendants. The humans fight for something I cannot name. They call it many things. Duty, love, hope, compassion. But I believe it is simpler than that. They fight because they cannot bear to see suffering and do nothing. They show mercy because cruelty would damage something inside them that they value more than victory. This should make them weak. It should be a vulnerability that enemies can exploit. And yet the Kathrani fear them. The Alliance relies on them. Other species whisper about humans as if they're forces of nature rather than beings of flesh and blood. That I am beginning to understand why. They're not the strongest species. They're not the most advanced. But they are perhaps the most dangerous because they fight with their hearts as well as their hands. And hearts, I am learning, can be more powerful than any weapon ever created. The intelligence report arrived at midnight. Delwyn was present when Commander Petrova received it. Watching her face change as she read the contents, a Kathrani force of 1,500 warriors was moving toward a refugee camp at Hollowell Valley. The camp held 4,000 displaced colonists who had fled earlier battles. They had nowhere else to go. The Alliance fleet was 12 hours away. There were no other military units within range. Only Battalion 12 stood between the Kathrani and the camp. And Battalion 12 had 300 soldiers. Petrova called her officers together. She did not soften the truth or offer false hope. The enemy outnumbers us 5-1. We have 6 hours to prepare defensive positions before they arrive. Reinforcements are 12 hours away. We need to hold for 12 hours against impossible odds. Silence filled the room. Delwyn expected fear, arguments, perhaps even refusal. The math was simple. Many of these soldiers would die. Instead, a lieutenant named Anders spoke quietly. "What do you need us, Commander?" Petrova smiled. It was a fierce expression, proud and sad at the same time. "Hollowell Pass. It's the only ground approach to the camp. If we hold the pass, they can't reach the civilians." The soldiers nodded. No complaints. No hesitation. They simply accepted their mission and began to prepare. Delwyn followed them out into the night, watching them work. Trenches were dug with mechanical efficiency. Obstacles were placed across the narrow valley. Fields of fire were calculated and cleared. The humans worked in silence, each soldier knowing exactly what to do. But there were other preparations happening too. Quieter ones. Delwyn observed soldiers exchanging personal items. A necklace passed from one hand to another. A letter was given to a friend with instructions to deliver it if the writer did not survive. 2 soldiers sat together, speaking in low voices, making promises about the future. Private Okonkwo, recovered from her wounds, approached Delwyn with her mother's scarf in her hands. "Historian, will you hold this for me during the battle?" "Why?" "Because I trust you to give it back to me when we win. And if we don't win, I trust you to remember why we fought." Delwyn took the scarf. It was soft and worn, carrying years of love and memory in its faded threads. "You believe you will win against such odds?" Okonkwo smiled. "I believe we will hold long enough for the reinforcements to arrive. The colonists will survive. That's the only victory that matters." The night passed quickly. Dawn came with gray light and cold wind. The humans stood in their positions, weapons ready, faces calm. Delwyn found a protected observation post near the command center. Commander Petrova stood at the front of the defensive line, refusing to lead from safety. "You should be in the bunker," Sergeant Madeira told her. "You're too valuable to lose." "I'm not more valuable than any of my soldiers. We fight together or not all." The first Kathrani scouts appeared at midday. They moved cautiously, testing the human defenses, probing for weakness. The humans held their fire, waiting. When the main Kathrani force arrived, Delwyn felt the ground shake. 1,500 warriors spread across the far end of the valley, their armor gleaming in the pale sunlight. They were massive, each one nearly twice the size of a human. They carried weapons designed to tear through metal and flesh. The Kathrani commander sent a message. "Surrender the pass. We will grant you quick deaths." Petrova's response was simple. "Come and take it." The battle began. The Kathrani charged in waves, confident in their numbers. The humans met them with disciplined fire. Each shot was aimed, efficient, deadly. The first wave broke against the human positions like water against stone. But there were more waves. By the 3rd hour, the humans had taken their first casualties. By the 5th hour, the ammunition was running low. By the 7th hour, soldiers were using captured Kathrani weapons because their own were empty. Delwyn recorded everything with shaking hands. The violence was overwhelming, but something else held the historian's attention. The humans did not break. They bent, they bled, they fell, but they did not break. A soldier went down. 2 others immediately pulled him to safety, while a third provided covering fire. A position was overrun. The soldiers fell back to secondary trenches and continued fighting. A weapon jammed. The soldier drew a blade and fought hand to hand until a comrade could bring a replacement. Corporal Santos was everywhere, it seemed. She carried wounded soldiers to the medical station, then ran back to the line with fresh ammunition. When a gap opened in the defense, she filled it herself, holding the position until reinforcements arrived. "You should rest," someone told her. "I'll rest when they're safe," she replied, pointing toward the distant refugee camp. Hour 8. The center of the line collapsed. Kathrani warriors poured through the gap, screaming in triumph. Delwyn watched what should have been the end. Commander Petrova rallied a handful of soldiers and charged into the breach. It was suicide. It was impossible. It was the most magnificent thing Delwyn had ever witnessed. And then something happened that would haunt the historian forever. As the humans charged, one of them began to sing. It was a simple song, slow and powerful. Another voice joined, then another, then a dozen. They were singing as they ran toward death. The Kathrani hesitated. Just for a moment, just long enough, the breach was sealed. The line held, and the humans kept singing. The singing stopped. What replaced it was worse, silence. The humans fought in terrible silence, moving with a precision that seemed impossible for creatures of flesh and blood. Delwyn watched through the observation scope, trying to understand what had changed. These were the same soldiers who laughed and cried and sang songs about home. But they had become something else. The Kathrani had pushed through the defensive line. Hand-to-hand combat erupted across the narrow valley. This was supposed to be the end. The humans were outmatched in size, in strength, in numbers that it was not the end that a squad of 12 humans held a choke point against 40 Kathrani for 90 minutes. They fought with weapons until the weapons were empty. They fought with blades until the blades broke. They fought with rocks, with bare hands, with their teeth. Delwyn saw a soldier take a wound that should have killed him instantly. He did not fall. He grabbed the Kathrani warrior who had struck him and pulled them both into a pit, removing one more enemy from the fight. Another soldier, her arm hanging useless at her side, picked up a fallen weapon with her remaining hand and kept firing. When that weapon failed, she used it as a club. Sergeant Madeira was everywhere. Delwyn lost count of his wounds. A cut across his face, a burn on his chest, a blade wound in his leg that left a trail of blood wherever he walked. He should have been dead 3 times over. Instead, he was pulling wounded soldiers to safety while shouting orders to those still fighting. Hold the line. Hold it for them. For them. The colonists in the camp behind them. For 1,000 people who were counting on these soldiers to protect them. That was what the humans were fighting for. Not glory, not survival, not victory, just a chance to save strangers. The Kathrani commander sent warriors around the flanks, trying to find a way past the human defenders. Commander Petrova had anticipated this. Small groups of soldiers held the high ground on either side of the valley, forcing the enemy to pay for every meter of progress. Corporal Santos led one of these groups. Delwyn watched her position come under sustained attack. The Kathrani threw wave after wave against her soldiers. They did not break. When reinforcements finally reached them, only 3 of the 12 soldiers were still standing. Santos was not among the standing. She had taken a plasma bolt to the chest in the final minutes. But she was still alive, still giving orders from where she lay. Watch the left flank. They're trying to sneak through. Watch the left. Her voice faded as medics carried her away. Hour 10 arrived with unexpected news. An Alliance scout ship had arrived early with a small relief force. It was not enough to win the battle, but it was enough to stabilize the line. Fresh soldiers poured into the defensive positions. Fresh ammunition was distributed. Fresh hope spread through the exhausted ranks. Delwyn felt the moment the battle changed. The humans, who had been fighting for survival, began to advance. Not retreat, not hold. Advance that it should have been impossible. They were exhausted, wounded, outnumbered. They had been fighting for 10 hours against superior forces. By any rational calculation, they should have been finished. But humans, Delwyn was learning, did not follow rational calculations. Commander Petrova led the advance personally. She had wounds on her arm, her leg, her face. She moved with a limp. But she moved forward, and her soldiers followed. The Kathrani, who had never seen prey become predator, hesitated. That hesitation was fatal. The human advance was not fast or dramatic. It was relentless. Step by step, meter by meter, they pushed the enemy back. They fought with the same terrible silence, the same mechanical precision, the same refusal to stop. The Kathrani commander ordered a charge to break the human momentum. It failed. Another charge. Another failure. The massive warriors, so confident in their strength, began to look uncertain. And then they broke. That IT started at the edges. Kathrani warriors at the flanks began to retreat. The retreat spread to the center. Within minutes, the entire enemy force was running. The humans did not pursue. They had achieved their objective. The valley was secure. The refugee camp was safe. Delwyn emerged from the observation post on shaking legs. The battlefield was covered with bodies. Most were Kathrani, but too many were human. The cost of this victory was written in blood across every meter of ground. Petrova was sitting against a rock, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow. Medics were treating her wounds, but she kept pushing them away. Check the soldiers first. I can wait. Commander, you've lost a lot of blood. I said check the soldiers first. Delwyn approached slowly. The commander opened her eyes, and for a moment, the historian saw the depth of exhaustion behind them. The weight of command. The grief for the fallen. Historian, she said quietly. Did you get what you needed? I do not know what I need anymore. I came to document tactics and weapons. Instead, I have witnessed something I cannot explain. Petrova smiled. It was a ghost of her usual warmth, but it was real. We're just humans, historian. This is what we do when people we care about are in danger. You cared about strangers. Everyone is a stranger until you choose to care about them. We choose to care about everyone. Delwyn looked across the battlefield at the dead and the dying, at the soldiers who had given everything for people they had never met. The galaxy calls you deathworlders. They say you are survivors of a brutal planet. That's true. They are wrong about what makes you dangerous. It is not your planet that should frighten them. It is your hearts. Petrova closed her eyes again. Write that down, historian. Make sure the galaxy knows. We don't fight because we hate what is in front of us. We fight because we love what is behind us. Behind them, in the refugee camp, 4,000 colonists were waking up to discover they were still alive. Because 300 humans had held the line. Because 300 humans had chosen to care. 3 years passed before Delwyn finished the historical record. 3 years of research, interviews, and careful documentation. The Battle of Hollowell Pass had become famous across the galaxy, but the historian's account would be the definitive version. The truth, preserved for eternity, but something remained unfinished. Delwyn sat in a quiet garden on the Vareshi homeworld, surrounded by flowering plants and the soft sound of water. The journals were complete. The analysis was finished. Yet the historian could not let go of what had been witnessed that a message arrived. Commander Petrova was visiting the Vareshi homeworld on a diplomatic mission. She had requested a meeting. They met in the garden at sunset. Petrova looked different, older, tired. The war had ended 2 years ago, but she still carried its weight in her eyes. Her wounds had healed into scars, each one a memory she could never escape. Historian, she said, settling onto a bench beside Delwyn. It's good to see you again. Commander, you have aged. Petrova laughed. It was a softer sound than Delwyn remembered. War does that. Peace does too, in a different way. How are your soldiers? Some went home to their families. Some stayed in the military. Some. She paused. Some never came home at all. We lost 187 at Hollowell Pass. I remember every name. Delwyn had recorded those names. Each one was preserved in the historical record with full honors. But names on a page were not the same as living beings. I have spent 3 years trying to understand what I witnessed, Delwyn said. I have documented 47 species at war. None of them fought the way your people fought. We're not special, historian. Just stubborn. That is not what the Kathrani believe. Petrova's expression shifted. You've spoken to the Kathrani? I have reviewed their records of the war. There is something you should know. Delwyn produced a small data device containing copied files. The records had taken months to obtain through diplomatic channels. What they contained had haunted the historian since the first reading. After the Battle of Hollowell Pass, the Kathrani captured 3 wounded human soldiers during a later engagement. They were tortured for information about human tactics and weaknesses. Petrova's face went pale. I didn't know anyone was captured. The records were classified. The Kathrani did not want other species to know what happened. What happened? Your soldiers did not break. None of them revealed any information. They endured days of interrogation without giving the enemy anything useful. Petrova's hands trembled. Delwyn could see her processing this information, grief and pride mixing in her eyes. One of them, before dying, spoke to the Kathrani interrogator. The words were recorded and included in the official report. Delwyn activated the device. A rough voice filled the garden, speaking through pain and exhaustion. You'll never understand. We don't fight for ourselves. We fight for each other. You can break our bodies, but you can't break that. It's bigger than any of us. The recording ended. Petrova was crying silently. The Kathrani interrogator added a note to the report. Delwyn continued. It said, "Discontinue capture protocols for human subjects. They cannot be broken. They are not like other species." A long silence followed. The sun set behind the garden walls, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. "They thought we were weak," Petrova finally said. "Because we show mercy, because we grieve, because we love, they discovered otherwise. At a terrible cost." Delwyn nodded. This was the truth that had taken 3 years to understand. Human strength did not come from weapons or tactics or biological advantages. It came from something far more profound. "I have completed my historical record," Delwyn said, "but I would like to read you the final entry, the conclusion of my observations." Petrova wiped her eyes. "I would be honored to hear it." Delwyn opened the final journal and began to read. "I was assigned to observe humans in battle. I expected to document tactics, weapons, and strategy. Instead, I witnessed something far more profound. I watched beings from a death world, a planet that should have killed them 1,000 times over, fight not for survival, but for each other. I watched them laugh in the face of death, cry for their enemies, and die singing. The Kathrani believed they could not be broken. They were wrong. Humans can be broken. They break all the time. They break and they put themselves back together and they stand up again. That is what haunts me. Not their violence, not their fury, but the terrible, beautiful truth that humans are held together by something the rest of the galaxy does not have. They call it love. They call it hope. They call it duty, that I call it terrifying, that I call it wonderful, that I was assigned to observe humans in battle. Why Saw still haunts me. But I am grateful for the haunting, because now I understand why the universe needs them. The humans do not fight because they hate what is in front of them. They fight because they love what is behind them. And may the stars help anyone who threatens what they love." Delwyn closed the journal. Petrova sat in silence for a long moment. Then she reached in her pocket and pulled out a familiar piece of fabric. A worn scarf with faded colors. "Private Okonkwo asked me to return this to you. She wanted you to have it. As thanks for remembering." Delwyn took the scarf. It was soft and warm, carrying decades of love in its threads. She survived. She's a sergeant now, has her own squad, teaching the next generation how to fight for each other. Delwyn held the scarf close. In 40 years of documenting war, this was the first time an observer had received a gift from those being observed. The first time the distance between historian and subject had disappeared completely. "Thank you, Commander, for letting me witness your people." Petrova stood and looked at the darkening sky. "Thank you for understanding us. Most species never do." She walked away into the evening, leaving Delwyn alone in the garden with memories that would never fade. The historian looked at the scarf, at the journals, at the stars appearing overhead. Some haunting, it seemed, was worth carrying forever.